I never thought that life at 72 would take such a strange turn. I had always imagined my later years as quiet and peaceful, with nothing more to do than reflect on the past and enjoy the simplicity of life. But the reality was far different. I was just an ordinary widow left alone in a quiet house after Robert passed. The house, once filled with laughter and conversation, now echoed with silence. More time than I knew what to do with settled around me like a thick fog. The days felt endless. People told me I'd adjust to the loneliness. The time would heal the ache. But as the years passed, the silence never seemed to soften. It only pressed deeper like an invisible weight on my chest. And that's when Buddy came into my life. A dog, a comfort, my companion. Little did I know as things would unfold, Buddy would become something far more than I could have ever imagined. Make sure to subscribe to my channel, so I can continue bringing you more fascinating true stories like this one. And don't forget to watch this video till the end and like the video because this story is going to be incredibly interesting. Please hit the like button to show your support. It all started so innocently. Emily, my daughter, had been suggesting for a while that I get a dog. "It'll keep you company, Mom," she said with a knowing smile. But I knew what she was really thinking. She was worried about me. She didn't realize that I had already been grappling with a kind of loneliness that no animal could ever fill. But I gave in, as mothers often do when their children insist. So I went to the shelter and came home with Buddy, a sweet mutt with big soulful eyes. At first, Buddy was just a dog, a kind, affectionate companion who followed me around the house, wagging his tail whenever I looked at him. He was nothing special, really. But he became more than just a dog in the way that pets do. He had a remarkable ability to sense when I was sad. It was as if he could read my emotions better than any person ever could. There were times when I would sit on the couch, lost in thought about Robert, and Buddy would jump up beside me, resting his head on my lap, looking at me with those deep brown eyes. When I stroked his fur, I could feel the warmth of his presence lifting my spirits. It was comforting to say the least, though I knew it was only temporary. Over time, however, something shifted. Buddy wasn't just a dog anymore. It started out small, almost imperceptible. At first, I noticed that he began to follow me everywhere. He would sit near the door when I went to the kitchen, or sit by my feet when I settled at the table for dinner. But then it escalated. I began waking up every morning with Buddy curled up next to me on the edge of the bed, the spot where Robert used to sleep, now occupied by Buddy's warm body. I didn't mind it at all. It was the kind of comfort I had been missing since Robert passed away. It felt good to have someone, even if it was just a dog, there beside me, even in the stillness of the night. But it wasn't just his warmth that started to affect me. It was his presence, his constant watchful eyes. It wasn't normal for a dog to keep such a vigilant watch over its owner. Buddy started watching me with an intensity one had never seen before. It wasn't just that he was nearby. It was as though he was waiting for something, watching my every move. And that's when I started to notice how he seemed to understand me. It was the anniversary of Robert's death. And I was sitting alone on the couch, reflecting on the many years we had shared. It had been a difficult day, filled with memories and heartache. Buddy, as usual, was by my side. But this time he did something different. Instead of sitting quietly at my feet as he usually did, he jumped onto the couch beside me and rested his head on my lap. His eyes locked onto mine, filled with a tenderness I couldn't quite explain. And in that moment something changed. It was like he could feel the weight of my grief. He understood. "You're a good boy, Buddy," I whispered, absent-mindedly stroking his soft ears. As I did, I felt my heartache begin to soften just a little. It was incredible how much comfort his simple presence provided. And as I looked at him, I thought, he understands me better than anyone. It wasn't the usual way a dog looks at its owner. It was deeper, more intimate. There was something human in his gaze. It was unsettling yet somehow soothing. As the weeks passed, this bond between Buddy and me grew. I woke up every morning with him curled up beside me. At night he stayed close, often following me from room to room, watching me with those deep, understanding eyes. But there was something else, too. His attentiveness grew, and it felt as though he was always on the lookout for something. His gaze followed me around the house as I moved, always expectant. At first, I thought it was just my imagination. But the more I noticed it, the more I realized it wasn't just a typical pet-owner relationship. Something was shifting. There was one particular night that stands out, one that truly made me realize how much things had changed. It was late and the house was quiet. I had just finished a cup of tea and was heading toward my bedroom when Buddy trotted in behind me as usual. But this time, instead of at the foot of the bed, he did something unexpected. He climbed up onto the bed and sat right next to me. His large, dark eyes were fixed on mine, and I felt a flutter in my chest that I couldn't explain. "Buddy, what are you doing?" I asked, trying to lighten the tension I suddenly felt. But he didn't move. He just sat there staring at me. And there was something in his gaze, something intense, something that made my heart race. I could feel my pulse quicken, but I couldn't look away. It was as though he was waiting for me to do something, to acknowledge what had shifted between us. I reached out to pet him, and the moment my hand touched his fur, I felt it. It was as if a current passed through me, a warmth, a connection. It was the kind of feeling I hadn't experienced in years, not since Robert. The realization hit me hard. My bond with Buddy had crossed a line. What had started as companionship had become something deeper. Something I couldn't fully grasp. I couldn't deny it any longer. Buddy wasn't just my pet. He was becoming my lifeline. From that night on, things only got stranger. Buddy became even more attached to me. He began following me around, sitting close by whenever I was near. He watched me with that same intensity, his gaze never leaving me. It wasn't just that he was loyal. It was as though he was watching over me, anticipating my every move. And when we sat together, his body pressed up against mine in a way that felt more intimate than it should have. I couldn't explain it, but it was starting to make me uncomfortable too. I wasn't sure what was happening, but it was as if Buddy had become a permanent fixture in my life, something I couldn't escape. One night, I woke up to the moonlight filtering through the blinds. As I turned over, I was surprised to find Buddy lying right next to me, his face so close that I could feel his breath. At first, I should have been startled, but I wasn't. Instead, a strange calm washed over me. I reached out and brushed my hand against his fur, and he responded by nuzzling closer to me. I should have been shocked, should have felt wrong. But in that moment, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Peace. I knew deep down that it wasn't normal. This wasn't the way a healthy relationship with a pet should evolve. But I couldn't shake the feeling that Buddy had become something more to me than just a dog. I tried to brush the thought aside, telling myself that I was simply lonely, and that it was natural to seek comfort wherever I could find it. After all, I was an old woman who had lost the love of her life. What harm was there in finding solace in a dog's company? But as the days passed, the feelings didn't fade. In fact, they only grew stronger. Buddy seemed to sense it too. He was always by my side, waiting, watching. He followed me everywhere as though we were two halves of the same being, drawn together by something unseen. It was as though we were becoming something more than just an owner and a pet. It was something beyond the normal bounds of companionship, something I couldn't explain. It wasn't until one particular night, though, that everything came to a head. I had been feeling restless, unable to sleep, consumed by the growing attachment to Buddy. I wandered downstairs, hoping that a glass of water might calm my nerves. When I returned to the bedroom, Buddy was already there, lying on my side of the bed. He didn't move when I approached, just stared at me, his eyes intense, waiting, as if he had been expecting me all along. I climbed into bed, my heart racing. But once I was settled, Buddy moved closer to me. His body pressed up against mine in a way that felt far too intimate. It was as though the lines between pet and owner had blurred, and something deeper, something more troubling had taken its place. My breath caught in my throat, but I didn't push him away. I didn't want to. Instead, I let him stay there, his warmth filling the cold space in my heart. I should have been ashamed, but I wasn't. In that moment, lying in bed with Buddy beside me, I felt a sense of peace, a peace I hadn't known since Robert's death. We stayed like that for hours, two lonely souls seeking comfort in each other. But as the days went on, I couldn't shake the guilt and confusion that followed. I had crossed a line. I had allowed this attachment to become something more than it should have been. But at the same time, I couldn't stop myself. Buddy had filled a void that I hadn't realized was so deep. He had become my everything. But deep down, I knew that this wasn't healthy. I had allowed my grief and loneliness to guide me to a place where I was seeking comfort from a dog instead of the people who truly cared about me. My family, my friends. I had to face the truth. I had to let go of this attachment before it consumed me entirely. Buddy was a dog, loyal and loving, but he wasn't the answer to my loneliness. He couldn't fill the space that Robert had left behind. So slowly I started to pull away. I began spending more time with Emily and the grandkids, reconnecting with old friends and finding ways to fill my life with the things I had once enjoyed. Buddy was still there, of course, always by my side, but I made sure to set boundaries. I had to remind myself that he was just a dog, my dog, but not my partner. Looking back, I realize how easy it is to let loneliness lead you down strange paths, to form attachments that make no sense to anyone else. But in the end, it's the human connections, the love and support of family and friends that truly make the difference. Buddy will always be a special part of my life, but now I'm learning to embrace the world outside of my quiet home once more. As I sit here now, Buddy curled up at my feet, I feel at peace. Not the kind of peace that comes from escaping loneliness through strange attachments, but the kind that comes from facing my feelings and reconnecting with the people who matter most. In the end, it's the love we share with others that truly heals us, not the fleeting comfort of solitude or the unwavering loyalty of a dog. As I continued to grow and shift my focus, I found myself grappling with more complex emotions. The struggle to move on from Robert's death was a process that at times felt overwhelming. I had spent so many years as his wife, so many years dedicated to our life together, but now I was alone. And it was clear that I had used Buddy as a crutch to avoid dealing with the deeper, more painful aspects of my grief. I couldn't deny it any longer. This attachment had gone far beyond what was healthy, and while Buddy's love was unquestionable and his presence soothing, it wasn't the kind of companionship that would help me heal. It was only a temporary escape, a bandage on a wound that needed more than just comfort. It needed to be addressed, to be healed by the connections I had once relied on, connections with people who cared for me, people who knew the real me, and who could help me through the emotional turmoil I had buried for so long. The guilt that came with this realization was enormous. It was as though I had betrayed not only myself, but also Robert's memory. How could I let a dog take the place of the love I had shared with my late husband? How had I let my loneliness cloud my judgment and create such an unhealthy dependency? I felt conflicted, torn between the comfort that Buddy provided and the need to rebuild the human relationships that had always been the cornerstone of my life. But slowly I began to understand. I needed to reconnect with those around me. The first step was opening up to Emily. One afternoon, as we sat over tea, I confessed the truth about how I had been feeling, how Buddy had become a source of emotional support, and how it had become so much more than just a pet-owner relationship. "You don't have to go through this alone, Mom," Emily said after listening to me with the kind of compassion that only a child could offer. Her words were exactly what I needed to hear. And while they didn't immediately resolve the complicated feelings swirling inside me, they gave me hope. Hope that I could start healing. Hope that I didn't have to live in isolation, wrapped in grief anymore. One of the hardest decisions I had to make was to set boundaries with Buddy. I had to remind myself every day that he was just a dog. He was my companion, yes, but he wasn't a replacement for the love, care, and companionship I had with people. It took time, but I began to distance myself from the unhealthy emotional attachment I had formed. Buddy still remained by my side as he always had, but our relationship began to change. I started spending more time with Emily, going out to visit friends, attending church again, and taking walks in the park, where I would often bump into neighbors who had become strangers over the years. It wasn't easy at first. The loneliness crept back in, and there were moments when I was tempted to fall back into my old habits, to seek refuge in Buddy's warm, comforting presence. But I resisted. I told myself that I was doing the right thing. I was making the decision to live again, to fill my life with people who could offer me the kind of support and love that I needed. The days turned into weeks, and slowly I began to feel more connected to the world around me. I joined a book club at the local library, something I had always wanted to do but never had the time for. At first it felt awkward and unfamiliar. The other women at the club spoke of their children, their busy lives, and their families. I felt like an outsider, unsure of how to navigate the conversations. But as the weeks passed, I began to enjoy the group's discussions. We shared our thoughts on novels, laughed over plot twists, and talked about characters we all related to. It was as if I was learning how to interact with people again, to find joy in shared experiences. Through it all, Buddy remained a part of my life. He had always been there, unwavering in his loyalty, but I had learned to see him for what he truly was, a pet, a source of companionship, but not a substitute for human connection. I started setting clear boundaries with him. No longer did I let him sleep in the bed with me, a habit I had gotten used to during the darkest moments of my grief. Instead, I allowed him to sleep in his own bed, curled up by my feet. It were nights when I would lie awake, and I would feel the emptiness creeping in, and I would miss the warmth of Buddy's body next to mine. But I knew I was doing the right thing. I had to. I needed to rebuild the relationships I had once taken for granted. I needed to face the fact that my loneliness had driven me to a place I never thought I would go. But now I was learning to live again. One of the most significant changes came when I began to spend more time with my friends. I reached out to old acquaintances, people I had once been close to but had distanced myself from over the years. It was awkward at first. After all, many of these people had moved on with their lives while I had remained in the quiet solitude of my home. But they welcomed me back with open arms, and slowly, we rekindled old friendships. It felt like I was finally stepping back into the world I had left behind. I began to understand something essential. Loneliness, while painful, wasn't something I needed to escape from by creating attachments that weren't healthy. The true remedy to loneliness was human connection. The love and support that only friends and family could provide. I had spent so many years trying to fill the void Robert had left behind, but I now understood that nothing, no pet, no companion, could ever replace the love of a family, the companionship of friends, or the bond shared between two people who truly care for each other. As I re-entered the world, I found myself becoming more active again. I took more walks with Buddy in the park, but now I also spent time talking with neighbors, even striking up conversations with people I hadn't spoken to in years. I went out for coffee with Emily and my friends, laughing about old memories and creating new ones. I started volunteering at the local community center, helping others who, like me, had experienced loss or hardship. It was in these moments of giving, of connecting with others, that I truly felt alive again. Buddy was still by my side, always the loyal companion. He was no longer my only source of comfort, but he was a part of my life in a healthier way. I could now appreciate his company without relying on him to fill the emptiness inside of me. His love was pure, simple, and unconditional, and I cherished it. But I knew now that it wasn't enough to heal the deeper parts of me. Looking back, I see now how easy it is to fall into unhealthy patterns when faced with grief and loneliness. I allowed my feelings to cloud my judgment, and I sought comfort in Buddy, even though I knew deep down that I needed to reconnect with the people who loved me. But over time I found my way back. I learned to open my heart to others, to allow them to fill the spaces that Buddy couldn't. And in doing so, I found a peace I hadn't known in years. Not the kind of peace that comes from escaping loneliness, but the kind that comes from confronting my feelings, from accepting that grief and loneliness are part of life, but they do not define me. As I sit here now, Buddy curled up at my feet, I feel content. Not the kind of contentment that comes from hiding from my emotions or leaning too heavily on a pet, but the kind that comes from facing my struggles head-on, from rebuilding the relationships that matter most, and from accepting that I am not alone. I have my family, my friends, and even Buddy, who will always have a special place in my heart. In the end, it's the love we share with others that truly heals us. Not the fleeting comfort of solitude or the unwavering loyalty of a dog, no matter how wonderful.